So right here, this book, opening in Tanya, middle of page 196, like you just said, we're speaking about two types of repentance, or really the better word is teshuvah, which means return. There is no such thing as repentance in Judaism, but really the act of returning to God is called teshuvah, because we're returning not just to God, but to our deeper self, to our truer self. Now, the Baal Teshuvah, one who returns to God, in a way stands on a higher level than someone who does not, or someone who's been righteous all the time. Why so? How can you compare someone that's completely righteous to someone that's sinned and then return? And that is because by returning, we are transforming our past. And that's the power of Teshuvah. I think this is what this is explaining too also, that by returning on the highest level, we are really using our past as a springboard for growth, and therefore the past itself is being transformed. In a way, someone that is completely righteous, who did not explore the chambers of failure or chambers of sin, does not know what to do with those chambers of failure and sin, and therefore he remains separated from them, and therefore what he can elevate in this world is only the realm of righteousness. But the person who indeed explored those chambers of sin and failure and mistakes, and then transforms himself, he uses the experience that those chambers gave him in order to elevate him. And therefore, those chambers themselves are being elevated by him, something that the completely righteous cannot do. And therefore, he stands, as the Talmud says, on a higher level. Anyway, that's the big idea here, I think, that we've been exploring, but I know, Linda, you had a...
I do, Rabbi.
Yeah.
The question was about repentance, because then I go think about Yom Kippur. And although we're not repenting, we're asking for forgiveness for things that we have done. And is that not a form of repentance? Or, like that's what came up when you said
right.
that.
Yes, but repentance has that's almost a Christian tone to it, because
Okay.
what it means is that we go and confess, and that's it. In Judaism we don't see repentance as a destination of itself. The destination.
Okay, I understand that.
Right. I mean, it's part of it, but it's certainly not it.
Okay.
Right. And
Thank
we're returning to our true self. I will say this, I just on this theme, an idea comes to me, I think, which is a revolutionary idea, and that is that every mitzvah, I don't know if I've shared this with you in the past, but every mitzvah has a preparation for the mitzvah that is considered to be part of the mitzvah itself. So, for example, the mitzvah of tefillin, I had to go and slaughter a cow, and then prepare its parchment, and then write on the parchment, and then we can have tefillin, because those parchments were inserted in the boxes of the tefillin. So the preparation of this mitzvah is considered to be a part of the mitzvah itself. The Hebrew term is hechsher mitzvah, the preparation of a mitzvah. Now, what's interesting is this. There is a mitzvah called the mitzvah of teshuvah, returning to God. What's the preparation of this mitzvah that can be considered part of the mitzvah? What's the preparation for sin? Oh, for teshuvah, for returning? Sin. Sin. Without sin, I can't be prepared to return. Sin is what enables me to return. And therefore, sin is a part of the mitzvah itself if we return. And this is what this is saying, that the Baal Teshuvah, the person who returns, in a way transforms not just himself, but his past too. And that past, therefore, becomes a part of a mitzvah. And it's something that only he can achieve, not the completely righteous. And, it's like the story of Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berditchev, the great Hasidic master, who was once encountered by this man who was a quote unquote sinner. And Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berditchev said to him, "You know what? I'm very jealous of you." And he said, "Why?" He said, "Because when you return, all these sins will be transformed into merits for you, and you'll be on a much higher level than me." So the man told Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berditchev, "Well, come back tomorrow, come back next week, or come back next year. I'll have many more merits for you." But indeed, his words penetrated his heart, and he returned. And in a way, he was on a higher level than Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berditchev, because, again, that's what happens. Your past is transformed. It doesn't just disappear. transformed if you use it as a springboard. So that's the big idea here. And we can continue developing it through in the eyes and in the words of the Tanya. 196. Does anyone want to read? As our sages say, anyone?
I'll read.
Margo, I guess it's you. Go for it.
Okay, I guess it's me. Okay.
Yeah.
As our sages say, in the place where penitents stand, the quotation ends, even the perfectly righteous cannot stand there. With teshuva out of great love, the penitent attains a level of love for God that represents a place in which the tzaddik who lacks this particular type of love for God cannot stand.
Right. Continue a little more.
It is concerning this sort of repentance out of great love that they have said, willful sins become like virtues for him, since it is because of them that he has attained this great love.
Right. I just want to go to the very source of this teaching. The source of this teaching is Reish Lakish, who was a Talmudic sage some 2,000 years ago, maybe a little less, some 1,800 years ago. And he's the one who taught this quote right here, that willful sins become like virtues for the person who returns. Now, it's interesting to note that Reish Lakish himself was one of the great bandits of the day, and he himself returned. Reish Lakish, in fact, the story about Reish Lakish, it's just a fascinating story, is that he was swimming in the Jordan River, and at one point he decided to jump from one side of the river to another side of the river. Right there was a Talmudic sage by the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan sees this man jumping from one side of the river to the other, and he says to him, you know what? Your strength should be put into Torah, into studying. With this strength, you can achieve greatness. And Reish Lakish, who was really one of the chief bandits of the day, says to Rabbi Yochanan, and what's in it for me? What are you going to give me? Fine, you want to make a deal? I'll put my strength towards study, but you got to give me something. Rabbi Yochanan was a very handsome man. And he says to Reish Lakish, look, if you put your strength to study and you do become indeed great, I have a sister that's even more pretty than I am. And I'll try to convince her to marry you. That's what's in it for you. So Reish Lakish said, fine, we have a deal. And he put his strength into Torah study. And he became really one of the great scholars of the day. He became the devout student of Rabbi Yochanan. He ended up marrying Rabbi Yochanan's sister. And they had a wonderful family together. But Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan had a very special relationship. And each and every class, Rabbi Yochanan would receive 24 questions from Reish Lakish, 24 questions. That's what studying is all about, questioning, until he himself became really one of the great sages of the day. And then he went and he taught that willful sins become like virtues to him. Who, like Reish Lakish, would know this? That the sins of his past became a part of him in a transformative way, that he was able to elevate them to virtues. Now, the tragic ending of Reish Lakish is just heart-wrenching, because maybe I'm deviating a little bit, but just to give you the full picture, the full biography, Reish Lakish, towards the end of his life, was studying with Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Yochanan brought up a question about a specific arrow. You know, back then they had no guns or anything, they had bows and arrows. So a specific arrow, whether it can be susceptible to impurity or not, whether it can become impure or not. The general rule in Torah is that a finished product can become impure. So if it comes into contact with a dead body, it becomes impure. Unfinished products do not become impure. So he was asking us, but Rabbi Yochanan was asking about a specific arrow, whether it's considered to be a finished product or not, and therefore whether it can become impure or not. Then he turns to Reish Lakish, and he says, Reish Lakish, you should know about this. You were a bandit once upon a time. You know about all these arrows and bows. Reish Lakish took that so personally, as such an insult, because for him, he now was the great sage. What are you reminding me of my past? And he was so heartbroken that he died from heartbreak. And Rabbi Yochanan was inconsolable. And he was so inconsolable that he could, because how could he insult his beloved student and brother-in-law like this? But he was so inconsolable that Rabbi Yochanan himself died of a heartbreak.
Oh my God.
And that's the tragic ending of a teacher and a student or brother-in-law, and of two brother-in-laws. But Just going back to Reish Lakish's life and how it portrayed to all of us that really, if you can take the strength that you've accumulated through being a bandit or through sins, all in all, and not just the strength, but the wisdom and the experience, then we can transform that into greatness, something that the completely righteous cannot do. So it's just interesting to note who taught this. He knew this. He didn't just teach that out of a scholarly revelation, but really out of his own personal experience.
What was the significance of 24 questions?
Oh, it's a good question. I'm not sure. I'm really not sure. I'm sure there's a significance. I'm not sure. There's 24 books in the Bible. That's the number 24, but I don't know. Yeah. Good question.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure, David, please. That's what it's all about. 24 questions you have to ask.
Missing 23. I'm just curious, isn't it a byproduct of the human condition that inevitably we will all sin at one moment or another? So is there truly a man who is actually righteous to begin with, right? And then I guess my other question is, with respect to what you're talking about, it almost seems like there would be a sliding scale where the people who have done the worst things, if they come back with teshuvah, then are the most righteous, which makes sense to me, but I just want to make sure I'm understanding that.
No, right. Yeah. So regarding question 1, you're right. King Solomon says in the book of Proverbs that Ein Tzadik ba'aretz asher yaseh tov velo yicheta, that there is no righteous man that does good and does not sin. Everyone sins. The question is, what do you consider as a sin, right? So the completely righteous may have sins that I personally would consider as, just normal things. But for them, because of their level, it's sins. So a completely righteous, when he wastes time, for example, and he watches Netflix, for him, it's considered a sin. For me, it's not, because, you need the downtime sometimes. But for him, he's on a mission 24/7. So it's just an example. So depends, again, how you define sin. But I'm talking about those completely righteous who for them, sins are really normal things for others. Regarding question 2, so you're right. If a person can return in such a way, then they are on a higher level than they're completely righteous. If a person has been transformed like Reish Lakish has been transformed, then there is no doubt that they're on a much higher level. Talmud says so very, very clearly. And even logically, it makes sense because they have the experience, they have the wisdom that the completely righteous do not have. I would say it's the difference between being a professor and a doctor, right? Professors can study all they want, just like the completely righteous can study all they want about this life and the life that they have to, and the world that they have to elevate. But they were never engaged in this world, really. So they can reach a level of elevation that the completely righteous, that the once upon a time sinners could reach, because they know the world and they can elevate it, just like doctors can know, patients. It's not just in the books.
It's interesting. I see a parallel between this concept and just the concept of elevating awareness and consciousness in general, right? Like a person, for example, has self-destructive habits and they go to therapy or they do whatever, and they become aware of those, and now they're kind of at a level where they're able to see themselves, right? Or even in other religions, like in Buddhism, somebody meditates a lot, they develop a detached observer where they're able to see the separation of body and mind and the motivations for their actions. So it's kind of interesting. All of these systems have this parallel track to basically higher awareness,
Right, absolutely. And look, I think the root of all these ideas is a deeper idea that is somehow hinted here in the words of the Tanya. And that is that we are all on missions here in this world. We all have our own specific missions. Our soul was sent here to do something that no one else can do. And God decides where that soul goes. For the once upon a time sinners, God decided that they go to those sins. And God believes in them because they can elevate those sins. So in a way, we have this, the sinners have greater souls or greater missions, at least, than the completely righteous. Maybe God doesn't believe the completely right, doesn't have too much faith in the completely righteous,
Hmm.
and therefore he gives them a very boxed and very narrow type of mission. You have to be in the realm of holiness only. But it's those people who do explore the other side, who are sent to the other side, that God has more faith in, because he sent them to the other side. And he sent them to the other side not to remain on the other side, but then to transform the experience from the other side and elevate them. And now you can elevate them in all sorts of ways. Like you said, you can elevate them by learning from them and by learning from them about yourself. But also you can, some people elevate them. I don't think that they are better, for example, that they are better therapists than those who were in rehab themselves.
Right.
Because they now are elevating their past in a way that I think can be most effective. They know about that past, so they can teach about this past. They don't just keep it for themselves. Right? Yeah, Linda.
Rabbi, I'm a tad disturbed about, certain sins. We all sin continuously, but like malicious, murder. I mean, like there's certain sins that like, I cannot think are
right.
okay.
Right.
So like, I mean, that's what I just wanted a little
No,
different.
absolutely. No, look, first of all, let me just also, and I'm glad you bring this up, because I think we have to redefine two terms. Term number one is the term of sin. In Hebrew, the term for sin, it doesn't exist. The word for sin in Hebrew is chet, which means miss the mark, lachti, to miss the mark. There is no word for sin. So sin really is me deviating from the path of my true self, path of my soul. So it's an important thing. Sin has like this connotation of impurity, but that's not, we just missed the mark. We missed the mark when we sin, when we quote unquote sin. That's number one. Two, I think more importantly, there are two types of sins, of missing the marks. And as explained in Judaism, there's what's called Ben Adam LaMakom and Ben Adam LaChavero. They are missing the marks. I'm going to try not to use the word sin, but they are missing the marks of me towards God, me versus God, and what I do in my personal chambers. And there are other types of sins, me versus others. Ben Adam LaChavero, if I miss the mark towards someone else. Now, what's interesting is this: if I miss the mark towards someone else, God can forgive me, but only if the other has forgiven me. If the other hasn't forgiven me, then how can God forgive me? Right? Now, murder falls into that category. And, raping falls into that. All the terrible sins fall into that category. It's me versus someone else. God can forgive me, but there's still the other that needs to forgive. And what I've done, if I missed a prayer today, or if I, whatever it is, if I did something that didn't harm someone else, but it harmed God, God could forgive me for that by himself easily. And in a way, he does. If we can ask for forgiveness. There are, in general, three types, as Maimonides lays out. There are 3 steps, actually 4 steps to teshuvah, to true returning. If we're speaking about returning, let's speak about the 4 steps. Step number 1 is actually having remorse. If you don't have remorse, you can't return. Step number 2 is uttering this remorse, saying to God, actually speaking about it. You can't just feel it. You actually have to say it. It's called vidui in Hebrew. You actually have to confess, say it. Step number 3 is to take upon yourself never to do it again. Step number 4, the teshuvah is only complete when you are tempted with that, missing the mark, and you overcome the temptation. That's when we know your teshuvah is complete.
Beautiful.
So this is true for all the sins versus God, or the missing the marks versus God. Versus the other, I would add a fundamental step before step 1. That is that the other has to forgive you.
Thank you.
Without
That was
that, it
really
doesn't
beautiful.
work. Yeah. Okay, yeah. Good questions. Okay, we can continue unless there's any other questions, comments, disagreements.
I have a question.
Yeah, please.
I'm wrapping my head around this concept of the other forgiving. I think that there are, just to give an extreme example, right? In murder, it's physically impossible because the person's dead, right? So how would they forgive you?
That's right.
Yeah.
And that's
That-
why murder, that's right. That absolutely. And you're right. And you're touching upon a point that is very, very, very important, because that's one of the things in which we differ from Christianity. Christianity, you're allowed to forgive on behalf of someone else. You see that all the time. Murderers come to court, and the family of the victim comes and says to the murderer, you know what, we forgive you on behalf of our son, on behalf of our daughter that you murdered, whatever it is. In Judaism, you can't do that. Only the person that you harmed can forgive you. Who are you to forgive on behalf of someone else? And you're right. Therefore, in murder, the other person can forgive you. Now, there's mystical methods where you can go to the person's grave and ask for forgiveness, but you really never know whether they forgave you or not. And you have to live with that feeling your entire life. Yeah.
What about in more complex cases where there's, let's say, a sin that you recognize as a sin, but the other person doesn't even recognize as a sin. So from their perspective, even if like no sin has a cure. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, we have. It's a good question. I mean, you can. We have the GPS, so to speak, the Torah that defines what sin is and what sin is not. But all in all, the general rule is that when I'm talking about the second category of sins of me versus the other, then as long as I even feel that the other has been harmed, I have to ask for forgiveness. Now, there is a limit to how many times I have to ask also. I have to ask 3 times according to Judaism. Now, sincerely, you can't just ask just to get, to check the boxes. You gotta ask sincerely, but you have to ask sincerely 3 times. If after 3 times the other person hasn't forgiven you, then you don't have to worry about it anymore. God has forgiven you. God has scratched it off your record. But you have to ask 3 times sincerely, and that again might not follow the script of that GPS of the Torah. It's just a feeling. Maybe I harmed someone, so let me ask for forgiveness. If they forgive you after the first time, then you don't have to ask 2 more times.
It seems that in those moments, because what I was describing earlier was a moment where you've achieved a higher level of consciousness, so you see that you mistreated somebody, but the other person doesn't even realize they've been mistreated because they're at a lower level of self-awareness, and it's almost that you asking for forgiveness invites them to join you at that higher level of consciousness, but could also cause them pain if they realize it. So it's kind of
right. Well, they'll realize it one day or another. I really believe that all people reach a higher level of consciousness. Sometimes they reach it on their last day on earth when it's a little bit too late. So rather do it now than wait.
Fair enough.
Yeah, good point. I will say this though, speaking of forgiveness and teshuvah, because this is a theme here on page 196. It's interesting also, and this is also where we differ from other religions, and that is that in Judaism, if I really did teshuvah, like we were speaking about through those 4 steps, and if it involves someone else, first and foremost asking that someone else, and doing all that I need to do, and then also growing from those sins like Reish Lakish did, then God erases those sins completely from our record. So there's this idea or this belief that after life, our soul travels to the heavens, and before God decides whether we go to paradise or to hell, which we can define today or some other time, because it's very different in Judaism than in other religions, then God shows us a whole movie of our lives. Now, he shows us that movie from a divine perspective. In a way, that's hell. Shows us a movie from the divine perspective, and each time we messed up, we missed the mark, it pains us because we see it from a divine perspective. So we say to ourselves, gosh, we should have known better. Why did I do this? And it creates much embarrassment and pain to the soul. In a way, that's hell. Now, if I returned, as we're speaking about here, those missing the marks are completely erased. God doesn't show it to us. It's not part of us anymore. We used what it gave us, and we elevate ourselves to a higher level that it's not a part of us anymore. It's just not me. And therefore, God doesn't show it to us. That's the power of teshuvah, the transformative power of teshuvah, that it can transform someone into someone else. That high level of consciousness, David, that you're speaking about is really so transformative that you become someone else. Or you become not someone else, dare I say, you become your true self. A true self that maybe you were never aware of. It's almost like a caterpillar turning into a butterfly. You can't say that the butterfly wasn't a caterpillar, but you can't define it as a caterpillar anymore. It's not a caterpillar anymore. That's what teshuvah does. I return to my true self. The caterpillar is born to be a butterfly. It has all the ingredients of becoming a butterfly. Just sometimes caterpillars die too soon. Or sometimes caterpillars don't have the power to transform themselves into that butterfly that they were born to be. Or maybe someone punches their cocoon when they develop as a butterfly for those 3 weeks. But who knows? But caterpillar is born to be a butterfly, and that's what we do when we do teshuvah. Stop being a caterpillar. You have wings to fly with, and that's transformative. And then God can't judge us as a caterpillar; He judges us as a butterfly. Therefore, they're not mentioned to us. You know, just I think this is an important also idea in education in general, because you know, as parents or as educators, we often judge students or children based on being them being the caterpillar instead of looking at the butterfly within them. So I have a good friend who told me about a teacher that he had. He used to daydream. I don't know if anyone here in class, when you were young students, you used to daydream. And he would always look outside the window. And the teacher would come up to him very often and say to him, you know, nothing will ever come out of you. He says, why? He says, because no one's going to give a salary to someone who just stares outside, who daydreams and looks outside through the window. Today, this man is a pilot. And all he does all day, he looks outside the window and daydreams.
That's funny.
Now, you had a teacher who couldn't see that. Thank God someone did see that in his life. And he became a pilot thanks to that someone. But that teacher, unfortunately, didn't see someone. You see, he was looking outside the window because he saw himself with wings. He saw the heavens. He knew that's where he belongs. The teacher, unfortunately, couldn't see that. And we look very often, whether at others, our children, students, or even at ourselves, and all we see is a caterpillar. And we need that teshuvah process, or someone to teach us that teshuvah process, to inspire us that we're not those caterpillars, we're those butterflies, we're those pilots that have wings to fly. And that's what teshuvah does, really. That's really what teshuvah does. It's accomplished through those 4 steps. But the destination of teshuvah is just that. And when we get to that level, then we transform our past. Then our daydreaming is transformed into piloting. And there's nothing more transformative than that.